Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone is enjoying their new year so far. And we are back. A 2 week layoff for us. We let the SEC bowl games play out. We let all the college football playoff games play out as well. But we are back for the final time here of the football season. Then we get into our off season with our March Madness and all of our wonderful shows. So we have the SEC bowl game recap and national title preview. And once again, I have my co-host Wade. How you doing tonight?
Doing great. We were treated to a wonderful holiday season full of great bowl games, and some of our teams showed up and some did not. So let's dive into it.
Yeah, we'll see how good the SEC did. Will they hang around that 500 spot that they have in the past couple of seasons, or will they have success in the bowl season? Tune in to definitely find out how your favorite team did in the SEC, and also if you're outside of the SEC, we'll also talk about TCU and the Georgia game that will be coming up in the coming days. So let's waste no time. Let's get right into the show. But as always, we always do the AP poll, but no longer the polls are coming out with the season ending here. We'll obviously have the final poll come out once the national championship is done, but we won't have a football show during then. But so just a reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to leave us a comment. This is going to be your last chance of asking questions. Maybe looking forward to know the next season of the Southeastern Conference, how the conference is going to be shaping up. We might give a little preview of that before the end of the show. But if you have any questions, we definitely like to interact with all our fans in the comment section down below. So let's get to the bread and butter of the show with SEC Fantasy. This was definitely a long awaited segment for both of us, and this is presented by our friends at Buffalo Bayou Brewing Company. We don't have our co-host that lives in Houston anymore. He moved to Central Texas now, but we still love our friends over there at Buffalo Bayou Brewing Company. If you want the best brews and the views of the city, you can head over there to Buffalo Bayou, and you can also check out their website to see what brews. They have a really good food, really good selection on the menu. So www.buffbrew.com if you want to learn more about them. All right, let's get into first the SEC fantasy rules. This is what we put out before our SEC fantasy draft just 2 weeks ago. Two quarterbacks, two running backs, two receivers, and two defenses. And the lone rule that we really had is you must pick a player from the regular bowls and the New Year's Six. And since this is a SEC talk-based show, it has to be SEC player. So, Wade, let's kick it off with your team. First, we'll do the regular bowls and then the New Year's Six. Let's see how your team did throughout the bowl season.
That's right. And before I get into my SEC fantasy team, I want to give a 5-second shout out to Mr. Joe Burrow. He is an SEC fantasy alumni. We had him on the show heavily in 2018 and 2019 for the LSU Tigers, but he won me a championship in my Dynasty League this year. I took Joe over Patrick Mahomes, which was probably pretty crazy, but in hindsight, it worked out as him and Jamar teamed up to have a very good season for me. So I'm excited to see those guys and their careers pan out. Just as I'm excited to see a lot of these guys eventually grow into future NFL stars. And I think we have several guys between the two of our teams that will one day have that status.
Yeah, absolutely.
So kind of an underdog guy here, Brady Cook. He really got better as the season went along, willing Missouri into a bowl game. They fell short in their bowl game against Wake Forest, but it wasn't because of Brady Cook. He had a good day through the air, 230 yards passing, and then he added some rushing appeal as well. Quinshon Judkins, it took him a little bit to get going for Ole Miss. Overall, Ole Miss was just really sluggish and did not show the offensive potential that we know they have. I thought this was a really good matchup for Judkins and Ole Miss as a whole going against Texas Tech. They're not known for their defense traditionally, but they had a good game plan, and they won that game pretty handedly, something that none of us saw coming. But Judkins was able to muster 91 yards, which is a good total, but a little bit lower than his typical output. This guy, Matt Landers, I was happy to see him be heavily involved as a senior in the thrilling Arkansas and Kansas game that went to overtime. I think it went to 3 overtimes. But Matt Landers had a deep touchdown and 121 yards total. He actually crept into the top 5 for SEC leading receivers because of the effort. There's a whole bunch of them that are like right around 950 yards, and he is just a few yards ahead of the rest of the top 10. So good finish for him. And then the Kentucky defense, well, the defense showed up. The offense did not. The offense didn't really show up for either team between Kentucky and Iowa. But for SEC fantasy purposes, just 206 yards let up. So that's a very good effort for Kentucky in a bowl game.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll continue on with looking at your roster as we go on now to the New Year's Six bowl selections that you had. And as you can tell, Bryce Young went out with a bang during his Alabama career.
Yeah, and I was really pleased to see that for Bryce Young. I thought it was admirable that, he played in this bowl game, never was really any doubt. And I thought it was good that he took care of business and solidified his spot to me as the number one draft pick. I think you'd be foolish to pass over Bryce Young for Will Levis. CJ Stroud did have a good college football playoff. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But to me, Bryce Young is one of the best quarterbacks in college and is the best draft prospect coming out this year. So 321 yards for him. Very good day. Jalen Wright, he was playing in a tandem with Jabari Small against Clemson. Both of them had good games, but Jalen Wright did have slightly more yards, so that was a good pick. He had 89 yards on the ground. He'll be a big part of that team's effort next year. And then Brock Bowers, the tight end out of Georgia, didn't have a ton of an impact as a receiver in this game. Ohio State did a good job of scheming against him, but he did make a very key reception on the go-ahead touchdown drive for Georgia, finished with 64 yards. And then the Alabama defense, deceivingly, they let up 401 yards, even though they were in control of the Kansas State game most of the day, but they did let up some big runs to Deuce Vaughn, as Tyler reminded me. So, I didn't think they would up 400 yards, but they did. But overall, it'll be okay because of that Kentucky defense.
Yeah, usually we do show the score, but for suspense, we're going to wait until my roster is revealed. So let's now dive into how my roster did, starting with the regular bowl games. Starting off, I had KJ Jefferson, quarterback of Arkansas, 287 yards, and like you mentioned, a 3 overtime thriller between Kansas and Arkansas. Raheem Sanders, not the game that I was expecting. This is his final appearances. He's going to be declaring for the 2023 NFL Draft. They didn't really use him as much as they did. Mainly the younger guys got the reps in this game, 17 yards rushing for Sanders. And the same with Antoine Wells. Notre Dame did a good job of really bogging him down. I mean, there was other key guys, like we'll mention, Xavier Leggett was the top receiver for South Carolina, but Wells, 30 yards. And Mississippi State's defense, I figured that they would do well. It'd be a defensive battle. I mean, at one point, it was 0-0 after the first quarter. Really, both offenses were struggling. So 288 yards, I would definitely take that. So now let's dive into my New Year's Six selections. As the quarterback I had was Stetson Bennett. So we pretty much picked the two best quarterbacks of the New Year's Six bowl games outside of Joe Milton. Bennett in the comeback, 398 passing yards. I'll definitely take that from him. Jahmyr Gibbs closes out his Alabama career with 76 rushing yards as he will now turn his attention. And the lone opt-out that we had, I had Jalen Hyatt. So Mr. Squirrel White, what a name
What
this
a name.
is. 108 yards and a really good win for Tennessee, picking up their 12th win on the year. So 108 yards, I'll definitely take that from a substitute receiver. And then Georgia defense, definitely the dud. I know that they got the win in the end, but 468 yards, really just it was just an awful showing from Georgia's defense. Their secondary definitely got exposed. CJ Stroud was able to find Marvin Harrison Jr., Ibuke as well. So we'll now go on to the SEC Fantasy Scoreboard to see who will take the cake, and it is none other than Wade. You got the convincing win here, 309 yards to 161 yards. So I know this one means a lot to you, along with your winning your Dynasty League as well. So 2 fantasy championships in 1 week. That must feel pretty good.
It does. But unfortunately, in our shared league for the NFL, did not have the same success. So I'm happy to take the cake here. I always like this episode with the bowl games. I think it's fun to have the two players. And important note here, I mean, let's let our fans have some say in this. Let us know if you like the format that we've been using with the traditional yardage, or if you want to see us mix in, rushing yards for quarterbacks or total all-purpose yards. Probably we will keep it yardage related because it makes the math pretty simple, and touchdowns in college are very unpredictable, as there's a lot of guys in the mix and on the roster. So anyways, in the offseason, we're going to brainstorm a little bit. Tyler's got some good ideas. I've got some as well. So let us know in the comments and, via text or something if you have any ideas of how you want this segment to be next year.
Yeah, we're always down for open ideas. If you want to see a new segment on the show, if you want to see, us implementing more rules, even more players, even, we could do two players each week and two defenses, especially whenever we have more games and whenever everyone is not on the bye week. So, yeah, so if you have any suggestions in the comments section, definitely feel free to leave one. So, that is our SEC fantasy wrap up for the year. I definitely look forward to SEC fantasy. Wade, once I brought him on the show, he had this idea. I think that this has worked every year. I agree. I love this bowl show that we did. Opening it to two players, and you can see the yardage. Like when I was going through the numbers at first before the defenses, we both had 900 yards, and you can see the two defenses knocked that down pretty good, especially on my end. I went from an even 900 to 161. You had 970 and you went down to 309. So defenses are going to matter every week, even when it's not this bowl season. So that'll be our wrap up for SEC fantasy. And now we'll move on to the bulk of our show. And that is going to be the SEC bowl game recap. And that is presented by our second sponsor of the show, YETI. And YETI, you can spend over $200 site wide and receive a free Rambler 14-ounce cup. So you can go over to our link there. I won't say it. You can use /scramble. So definitely support us. And if you want to use a great brand like YETI, we talk about it all the time on Sports Scramble. We had some stories of the YETI mugs going on a cruise ship and being, in the ocean and still being cold. And then Chet, he had his recent moving trip where he had to move some stuff and it was still cold as well. So YETI's got the durability. I know you have to pay a pretty penny, but still the durability is there. So let's not waste any time. Let's get into some SEC bowl recap and we'll see how the SEC teams did. And the bowl season did not shape out for the Florida Gators as they had a main opt-out, the quarterback, Anthony Richardson. So we saw the backup. And we saw Ricky Pearsall as well. He didn't decide to opt out as well. He had 4 receptions and 65 yards. Montrell Johnson had 70 yards on the ground, but nothing to show for. As number 14, Oregon State, this has been a team that Jacob and I have really talked about on Coast to Coast, really being a team that, if you really look back on their season, they had a close loss to USC. Really, all 3 of their games that they have lost have been really close. So Oregon State finishing out this season with 10 wins is definitely a season that they'll look forward to. And especially with the talent that they're bringing back, and they're getting DJU, the transfer from Clemson. So we'll see who will be the QB1 for the Beavers. But really, my question is, I know that we had the preseason show. We were talking about the new hires of Billy Napier and Brian Kelly. What would you give the grade for Billy Napier's first season in Gainesville?
Well, I think this one really trended in the wrong direction ever since I gave him some praise after the big win against South Carolina, because then he turned around and had losses to Vanderbilt, Florida State, and Oregon State. Now, the last 2 teams there, Oregon State and Florida State, they're just simply better teams than Florida. I don't know if Florida was expected to go 2-0 in those ball games, but just not looking competitive really in any of those games. Kind of letting emotions get in the way against Florida State and again against Oregon State. I mean, Florida had to bring out the kicker to avoid getting shut out 30-0 on the final play. So
did you like that move or no?
Not really. I don't really think there's a moral victory in scoring 3 points. But I guess it looks better in 30-0. But yeah, I'd have to give Billy Napier, I'm going to give him a flat C. for now. I don't really feel inclined to have any positivity towards the hire. I don't think he'd be fired after 1 year. I just think that I don't think Florida really upgraded with this hire at the moment. I I still think that Dan Mullen actually would probably give them more appeal, unless Napier can really solidify recruiting and NIL. I mean, I think he's a likable guy. I think he's got a good offensive plan, but the more and more you look at it, UL Lafayette, they won with a very specific scheme. It was kind of a modified option, and that's not really going to work in the SEC. So he's going to have to get to the drawing board.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking back at the season, I mean, after the first week, we were praising that hire after beating a really good team of Utah. And then as the season went on, they just lost games that they really shouldn't have, like especially that game against South Carolina. They lost to LSU early in the season, and they played Georgia well, but they ended up losing that game. And then they lost the bowl game, like is showed on the screen there, of Oregon State, and we're seeing players leave the program now. So there's definitely going to be some question marks around this Florida program. Back-to-back 6-win seasons. We'll see if it's going to get any better because the SEC East is going to improve as well. I don't think that Tennessee is going to go. South Carolina is improving as well. We'll see what Georgia is next year. They're going to lose some pieces, but they're going to reload. They're going to be pretty much what Alabama is built on, what Nick Saban's doing with that program. So we're going to close the book on Florida season right there. We're going to move on to the next SEC bowl game, and that featured Sam Hartman and the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. And we actually had some news about Sam Hartman. He's actually transferring to Notre Dame, so that's definitely a huge pickup for the Fighting Irish. So Wake Forest got the win here, 27-17, and Wake Forest's defense was really able to shut down Brady Cook in that offense. Missouri is going to lose one of their receivers. He's going to be hitting the transfer portal, Dominique Lovett. I know that we talked about that. You had some question marks with that. I mean, Lovett was really the go-to guy for Cook, but now that they'll have to deal with a true freshman wide receiver, he was able to have a good game as well. But this really was a game that dominated by Wake Forest from start to finish. Missouri was able to get it within 10 points. But in the end, Wake Forest's defense was just too much. They were able to get some timely turnovers. Nonetheless, though, when you look back at Missouri's season, I mean, they were pretty much, other than Ohio State, they were about the only team to play Georgia as close. And then you look back on another close game, that Auburn game where they had it in the bag, and then Auburn scored that late touchdown. So I think that in the end, Missouri – they were a team that of what ifs. It was close losses. If they turn both those losses, they're an 8-win team. But now that they're a 6-win team, on Wake Forest's side, really probably if you ask anyone, probably not the season that they were hoping for. They have Sam Hartman back. They have a lot of key pieces on both sides of the ball, but just weren't able to compete with the likes of Clemson this year. So what are your thoughts on this Missouri season?
I got to think that Missouri honestly played to expectations. It wasn't pretty at times. They did have some really good games, like you mentioned, against Georgia and South Carolina. They made a bowl game. They lost it, but Wake Forest is a good team. I think that Wake Forest just had more talent on the field with Sam Hartman. I thought this game was going to be a little bit more higher scoring. I was surprised to see both teams held under 30 points, but nonetheless, an admirable effort for Missouri. They get Brady Cook back. I'm interested to see what this team can do, but I do think Missouri is going to be near the bottom of the SEC when it comes to NIL. We've already seen them near the bottom in the SEC in terms of just general recruiting. So they're going to have to make some adjustments as a program if they want to make that next step. But I do think Elijah Drinkowitz is the right guy, and I think that he generates a lot of buzz for that program. We'll just have to see if it's enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this season was a step in the right direction. Missouri, I mean, wasn't even. So I think they did a good enough job. A lot of the media were picking them to finish dead last. Vanderbilt was the pick to finish last. But I think that Missouri, even in also Vanderbilt too, that's a team that won't be talked about in this week. So, but even with Vanderbilt, I think that they were able to really compete in some games. I know that they got blown out in the last game in the regular season against Tennessee, but I think that's a program with Clark Lee as their head coach as well. So I think that Clark Lee and Eli Drinkwitz are definitely the right fit for both of those programs. So that will also close the book on Missouri's season. So we're gonna obviously gonna recap the bowl games. We're also gonna recap the season since this will be the last time that we talk about this 2022 football season upon us. And I'm guessing Be Real is going on
It
as
is.
Wade is snapping
We
a
gotta
photo. So
we gotta
that
get
always
our advertising out there, Tyler.
yeah, that that always goes out there. But this was honestly one of the game of the year, honestly, in the bowl season. Kansas versus Arkansas. You mentioned this in SEC fantasy. This went to 3 overtimes. But if you were watching this game, this was a game that was dominated by Arkansas in the first half. It was 31-7. Arkansas was rolling. KJ Jefferson was looking like the quarterback that we were all talking about and hyping up, especially with this Arkansas team, what they were returning back and what they got, especially with Drew Sanders, the Alabama linebacker that transferred to him. What a season that Sanders had. I know we mentioned him in our SEC award show. He got on our all-star team. But Kansas is always going to be a scrappy bunch. Jalen Daniels, not Jaden Daniels. A lot of
Not to be
LSU fans can
confused.
mix that up. But he had 5 touchdowns in that game before Jason Bean had to come in overtime, had to relieve him of his duties. Kansas was able to fight and claw their way back up from a 31-7 deficit. This game ended up going into overtime. A crazy scenario that happened. Arkansas actually had Kansas stopped in the second overtime, but Kansas got a second chance with a targeting penalty. Kansas was able to run it in on the next play, and then you go on to the third overtime. KJ Jefferson, Arkansas got the ball first. Jefferson runs it in from the 2 yard line. And then Kansas was trying to run it in with Jason Bean, but Arkansas, their defensive front, was able to hold true. So as you see the stat line there for KJ Jefferson, if we're going to do SEC fantasy the terms and change it up, KJ Jefferson would have been the play here. He had 287 yards on the air, 2 touchdowns, 14 carries, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So Jefferson was actually the leading rusher for Arkansas. This is definitely going to create a lot of vibes for the Arkansas fan base. If we see the Jefferson for 12 games next season, Arkansas is going to be legit. So both of these teams, if you look back at their season, Kansas and Arkansas, they both start off the season 6-0, highly ranked. Arkansas at the time, I believe it was the Texas going into the Texas A&M game. They were ranked number 8, and then they went on a 5-game losing streak. So really, Arkansas, this was a roller coaster ride. So going back, really looking at this season entirely, Arkansas was getting a lot of hype from us, especially we had them as our dark horse to compete in the SEC West. So just want to I'll open up the floor to you and talk about Arkansas season.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of expected this kind of outing on a weekly basis out of KJ Jefferson. Obviously, you can't hang 55 points in the
No.
SEC week in, week out, and it did go to triple overtime. But as far as that dual threat ability, being the best quarterback on the field, that's what we expected out of KJ Jefferson. And there was times where he was and times where he really just kind of disappeared. So Arkansas, kind of like Missouri, they're going to need the coaching staff and their quarterback to make that next leap if they want to jump some teams in the SEC West, because the West is going to be really good next year. I mean, you got to think that Texas A&M will rebound at least to be better than they were this year.
You would hope.
Auburn might still be in the cellar for a year, but Mississippi State and LSU had good seasons, surprising many people, including myself. And then Ole Miss, they're going to stay relevant as well with Lane Kiffin. So Arkansas really needs KJ Jefferson to be, like you said, maybe a Heisman candidate if they want to make a run next year.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Ole Miss because that's going to be the next team that we're going to be talking about in the bowl game, the Texas Bowl. And this was another showing that I had a lot of question marks, especially for the Ole Miss defense. Letting up 42 points. Now, I'm not ragging about Texas Tech's offense. They have shown in times this season in the Big 12 that they are good enough to put up 40 points on you. Like, really, the one game that I was looking at this Texas Tech team was that Texas game where they kicked that late field goal in overtime. But Ole Miss, this is going to be a season where pretty much you can say that it's like Arkansas as they start off the season 7-0. going on to the road on LSU. They lose that game pretty handily, like they did in this one, 42-25. Pretty similar score there, 42-20 at the hands of the Tigers, and then they lose back-to-back games at home against Alabama. So pretty much they lost 4 out of their last 5, finishing off an 8-5 season. So definitely not the season that Ole Miss fans were hoping for. There were some question marks going into the season. You were losing Matt Corral, your star quarterback, but you do get Jackson Dart. I think Jackson Dart is definitely going to be a good quarterback. I just think he needs more time. And you got your guy, you got your running back, really Zach Evans. We didn't see him for the second half of the year. Quinshon Judkins was your guy. And like you mentioned, Zach Evans, that's a guy that I'm wondering, like, I bet he wishes that he was still at TCU, especially with the magical ride that they're going on. So a lot of
Yeah.
respect for Texas Tech. We had them on the bowl show last year when they blew the doors off of Mississippi State. Now they go 2-0 against the state of Mississippi. So real good season for Texas Tech. I think whenever Texas and Oklahoma lead the Big 12, Texas Tech could be a team that could be like give a TCU run. I think they have a lot of resources there out there in Lubbock. So Malik Heath does get our player of the game, 8 receptions, 137 yards, and one touchdown. So Ole Miss roller coaster season it was.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of ups and downs for Ole Miss. I kind of expected them to be better than this. I expected them to be a 9-win team. They fell 1 game short here. Just a little bit of a head scratcher, but you got to think Texas Tech wanted to be in this game more than Ole Miss did. Ole Miss had Sugar Bowl aspirations, Cotton Bowl maybe, playoff at one time, and then they fall all the way down to the Texas Bowl. And Texas Tech probably had a slight advantage in the crowd. So I think this was a matter of who wanted this one more. And Texas Tech definitely wanted it more, and the talent was a lot more even than we anticipated.
And we'll move on now to our next game in the recap, and that will be the Gator Bowl. And that was another classic that gave us a top 21 matchup, Notre Dame versus number 19 South Carolina. And honestly, if you were to tell me that this score would have been 45-38, I probably wouldn't have believed you. I was expecting South Carolina's defense to show up in this one, but they were playing like South Carolina defense, especially in the first half of the season when they're allowing 40 points a game, especially to Georgia. But got to give credit to Notre Dame. South Carolina did start off this game hot, and I don't think I've ever seen a game with so many big plays and
Oh
so
my
many big
gosh.
plays on the defensive side. I mean, I had just had to replay that 100-yard interception return to put South Carolina and Notre Dame at an even deadlock of 38-38. Notre Dame and this one, there was another quarterback. They had to go to their backup since Drew Pine transferred to Arizona State. So there's 3 turnovers from the backup quarterback. But South Carolina, Spencer Rattler was able to have success through the air, 2 touchdowns. He did have interception, like you mentioned. Xavier Leggett, 7 receptions, 78 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But South Carolina just really didn't have any answer for the Notre Dame rushing attack. But South Carolina also did have an opt-out as well. We saw Marshawn Lloyd enter the transfer portal, so South Carolina also had to go into their depth chart. So we all were on South Carolina, but as always, Notre Dame shows up in the bowl season. So all in all, I think that even with the loss, South Carolina did have a good season. If you were a South Carolina Gamecock fan, you would definitely take those last 2 wins against Tennessee and Clemson over a bowl game win of Notre Dame. But Notre Dame was a team that we have definitely been talking about. They were started their season losing to Marshall of all teams, and we were thinking, are this team even going to make a bowl game? So I think I got to give my kudos to Marcus Freeman in year 1. Definitely a terrific job out there in South Bend, and Shane Beamer as well.
Yeah, I think that this game was super exciting. I think both teams pulled out all the stops as the season was closing. They weren't afraid to go for it on 4th down. There was a few sneak plays. And like you said, I've never seen a game with so many big plays. I mean, there had to have been 5 touchdowns in this game that were like 70+ yards, and they weren't all on offense. Some of them were on defense and special teams. We saw a long snapper catch a touchdown from a punter. So it was a good, entertaining game. I know this isn't SEC related, but talk me through Notre Dame's decision in their quarterback room, because it looks to me like this guy, I think his name is it's Tyler something.
Tyler Buckner. I finally like
Yeah,
got his name. I was trying to think of his name throughout like that whole recap, and I finally got it.
there it is. So Mr. Buckner started the season. They had a good game against Ohio State, but they really couldn't get any offense going. And then they had the big loss to Marshall. I think he got hurt during that game. He comes back for the bowl game, but Notre Dame finally finds a groove under Drew Pine against their rival.
They went 8-2 during that stretch.
Yeah, and they beat Clemson and they almost beat USC. Why are you going to commit back to the guy who got you off to an 0-2 start when Drew Pine was a redshirt freshman? Could have been your future. And then now you kind of cop out and you backpedal a little bit because Buckner failed his tryout here in this game. 14 of South Carolina's points were his fault. And now they're going to bring in a 1-year fix in Sam Hartman. I mean, for a guy like Marcus Freeman trying to build a program, why wouldn't you commit to Drew Pine and not subject yourself to the transfer portal?
Yeah, I think it's warranted. I had question marks whenever I saw Drew Pine in the transfer portal. I was like, "What is going on? Like this man led you to an 8-2, really it was looking like a season that had a lot of question marks, and a lot of Notre Dame fans were saying, like, is Marcus Freeman going to be our guy? But like you mentioned, we'll see how Sam Hartman does. I think that Notre Dame is going to be a team that's definitely going to be up there as well. I think that the benchmark for them next season, especially with everybody coming back, and you have a guy like Sam Hartman who has experience and is a seasoned veteran. I think that Notre Dame, I mean, Sam Hartman, we saw him at Wake Forest. We'll see him how he can do with this Notre Dame offense. So they are going to be losing Michael Mayer, one of the best tight ends that we have seen. And so we'll see. There's going to be a lot of definitely optimism from the Notre Dame faithful, especially with Sam Hartman coming in. But yeah, I definitely don't get, especially Drew Pine going to Arizona State. I mean, that's a program that's going to be with a new head coach, a new system. So we'll see if it works out for both parties. So we'll definitely continue to watch that. But we will now go on into the first of many New Year's Six bowl games for the SEC. And Rocky Top, even with the opt-outs, got a convincing victory over top 7 ranked Clemson, 31-14. And Joe Milton III, baby, got player of the game, 19 for 28, 251 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And we saw the birth of Squirrel White, the freshman wide receiver of Tennessee. No Cedric Tillman, no Jalen Hyatt, no problem for this Tennessee offense as really it was balanced all through. Jalen Wright had a good game as well. I know he didn't score a touchdown. I know that a lot of us say like, oh, he has to score a touchdown to have a good game. But 71 rushing yards against this Clemson defense, we'll definitely take that. I got to give kudos to Tennessee's defense. Really, after 2 awful games to end off the season, especially South Carolina, they were able to shut out Vanderbilt. So really good. I mean, Clemson fans, they were saying that, okay, Cade Klubniak was playing pretty good throughout the end of the season. And then he comes in this game, doesn't throw a touchdown, 2 interceptions. And really the problem that I've had with this Clemson team for 2 years now is like there's really not a guy that the quarterback can look towards. Like we're so used to seeing T. Higgins, guys like Justin Ross coming through, Sammy Watkins, DeAndre Hopkins, just so many talented wide receivers, and they really have to rely on Will Shipley, a do-it-all running back. He can do it all, but he can't do it all himself. So there's definitely going to be a lot of question marks to be answered for the Clemson staff. But A+ season for Josh Heupel and this Tennessee team.
Yeah, and I think that hype continues into next season. I, for one, was very excited to hear Joe Milton had another year of eligibility. I thought he was toast. I think he's a class of 2016 high school grad like us, so I don't know how that works out. But nonetheless, he is coming back, and he's got an electric arm, really can sling it. I think that'll work very well in Josh Heupel's offense. I actually thought I saw enough out of him in the final game in the bowl game that if he was out of eligibility and he was in the draft, I mean, I thought he was worth a 6th or a 7th round flyer, someone that you could develop just because of the talent alone. But yeah, good effort here from Tennessee. I'm impressed by the defense. We heard rumors that they, got in an internal squabble with the head coach before the the South Carolina game, and that they just kind of gave up on the season in that game. I think we can say that's not true now because they pitched a shutout against Vanderbilt, and then they really shut down Clemson here, who I thought was gaining a lot of momentum with Cade Klubniak at quarterback. But like you said, this Clemson team just looked very one-dimensional. So we'll have to see the trajectory of both of these programs. I think they'll both be preseason top 10 teams, but Tennessee, to me, I think they can make that jump next year and contend with Georgia.
And Tennessee was able to finish off the deal here in the all Orange Bowl. So now we'll head on down to the Big Easy and recap the Sugar Bowl between Alabama and Kansas State, and was the top 10 matchup. And this game started off really, I mean, Alabama was scratching their head in the first quarter. Kansas State got off to a 10-0 start. Deuce Vaughn had that 88-yard touchdown run to put K-State up 10-0. And then all of a sudden, Alabama wakes up. Bryce Young at the start was really not on the same page with his receivers. Really a lot of underthrows, a lot of overthrows that we were seeing. But Bryce Young wasn't going to go off like that. 321 yards passing, 5 touchdowns. We saw Jermaine Burton, the former Georgia wide receiver, get a touchdown as well. So this was a really good game. It's definitely refreshing to see guys like Bryce Young and Will Anderson stick it out for the bowl game, because honestly, they could have just laid it down on the towel. I mean, Bryce Young's going to be the first overall pick, probably going to the Houston Texans. Will Anderson's probably going to be the pick after, going to the Chicago Bears. That's definitely a right fit for him. So I got to give my kudos that Alabama was able to finally win a Sugar Bowl after so many years of losing in the Sugar Bowl outside of the college football playoff. But really good season for Alabama. I know that Alabama fans don't think that's a good season. You know, they always win a national championship, a college football playoff, but still getting 11 wins and beating a really good Kansas State team that won the Big 12 championship is definitely a season to remember.
Yeah, and I think that this game came at the right time. I think that a lot of people were starting to wonder if the Alabama dynasty was coming to an end. Kind of same commentary about Clemson as well. Those two teams have been very dominant over the last 5 to 10 years, really. And I think the answer is no. I think that we saw the next batch of talent for Alabama in this one. And then I think we saw their best overall football game of the season in this one with Bryce Young and Jahmyr Gibbs showcasing their final game. But one thing that stands out to me for Alabama is not one of the wide receivers we saw, maybe besides Jermaine Burton, will be leaving the program. And I think you're kind of going to see that next wave of talent at receiver. I think maybe we were too critical on them for not having that guy this year. But when you have 5 or 6 guys drafted in the first round over the last 3 years, that's going to happen. And maybe they just needed a year to build it up. But I would look out for Alabama next year. I think they'll come back with vengeance.
Yeah, I mean, you can look down the roster and the talent's still going to be there. I know that they're going to lose Bryce Young. I think that's one of the best Alabama quarterbacks that we have seen come to the program. So that's definitely a disappointing. And I mean, Bryce Young had 3 years for the program. He didn't end up winning a national championship. So that's where Alabama fans are kind of in the disappointment of that. So we're going to be seeing the next wave of these young stars at Alabama getting a chance, especially with we also saw Eli Ricks, the former LSU cornerback. He is not entering the transfer portal once again. He's entering the 2023 NFL draft. So we're definitely going to see the next wave of talent on Alabama. So we'll definitely have our expectations for Alabama going into next season. And we're going to go on to the next game, the Music City Bowl. Not a lot to really talk about for the Kentucky Wildcats. As you can see there, a big old goose egg on their side as they got shut out by Iowa, and you could probably say, oh, Iowa finally scored a touchdown on the offensive side. You would be correct.
Only one.
But 2 of their touchdowns were pick sixes. So a lot of key stars out for Kentucky on this one. Will Levis, a quarterback that we have talked about really a lot on this show for his NFL draft type. And then Chris Rodriguez, we saw him opt out as well. So really the only guy that was a key starter was Dane Key, 6 receptions, 47 yards. But there is optimism for this Kentucky program moving to next season. I want to get your thoughts on this. Devin Leary heading to Lexington. What are your really expectations of Kentucky? Because I know in the preseason you had this team as one of your favorites. Are they going to be one of your favorites heading in the next season?
They are not. You will not see me on the big blue train next year. And in regards to Devin Leary, I'm kind of scratching my head on this one. I mean, I kind of think that he wanted to play in the SEC and looked for the easiest job to win. And I don't know if that was necessarily the right move for him because I don't see Kentucky being any better than North Carolina State next year. And he's only going to be playing higher competition. And for him to pick Kentucky, that kind of tells me that he's maybe not as talented as we're thinking. Because if he wanted to play in the SEC and he wanted to compete at a school that had a chance, I mean, he would have been better off trying to go to win the job at Ole Miss, or winning the job at Texas A&M, somewhere where maybe the team had a little bit more potential, because I just don't see it being that way for Kentucky next year. But, they're about to have a quarterback drafted in the top 10, so maybe he just saw that as a convenient path. But I'm definitely tempering my expectations for Kentucky.
Yeah, we're going to have to temper expectations for these cats. So we're going to move on to one of the two big games that we had this past weekend, and that was the Peach Bowl at the College Football Playoff semifinal. And what a game this was. We had the TCU Michigan game to start off our New Year's Eve, and we had this one to close it out. Ohio State, I got to give credit to them. This was one of their best games that they played this year. CJ Stroud showed why that he was on the Heisman finalist list. And if you play like that throughout the season, he probably is hoisting up the Heisman Trophy at the end of the year. But this was a game, if you look back at it, you see the score 42-41. Definitely higher scoring than I thought, and definitely closer than I thought as well. A lot of people that I knew, especially us two, thought that Georgia was just going to rout Ohio State. That was not the case. Ohio State actually delivered the knockout punch in the first quarter. They were up 21-7 going into that. They had multiple leads in this one. They had a 14-point lead and a 17-point lead at two times, and then Georgia was able to get it back as well. So a lot of big plays in this one giving up. There was a lot of madness, especially going into the fourth quarter. We might as well talk about that. Ohio State was leading, and then Georgia and Stetson Bennett had that drive at the end of the game. There was only 59 seconds left for Ohio State in this one. CJ Stroud in the offense, no Marvin Harrison as he was knocked out with a hit, ended up getting a concussion. So a lot of the young receivers for Ohio State had to step up in this game. Stroud was able to lead them down the field, and they set up for a potential game-winning field goal, you would think. But no Ruggles. I guess the pressure just got to the kicker, and that one, he shanked it big time. That is the definition of shank in my book, as you just got to feel it for Ohio State. I think that they outplayed them. Every Georgia player, you could probably say that. Kirby Smart said that in his post-game interview. But Georgia escapes, and they head to the national championship as Stetson Bennett has another good day. So what are your thoughts on this game? I mean, this was definitely a game to watch. Do you agree with me that Ohio State played the better game, but Georgia escaped?
Yeah, I think that Ohio State really deserved to win this football game. They played really tough, I thought, especially with Marvin Harrison going out for the majority of this game. He made an instant impact early, and you got to think that had they had him on that final drive, he might have made one more big play. But for Georgia, I think what this game shows to me is that the playing field has been leveled between them and TCU, and I think it would have been if they were playing Michigan as well. I think that really there's not as big of a gap between number one Georgia and any of these three teams that were in the playoffs. So I think we're in for a treat for the national championship game. TCU is going to find a way to really exploit this Georgia defense. I think they're going to take notes from Ohio State. So kudos to the Buckeyes. They fell just short, though.
I agree, and we'll definitely get to the national championship preview here in a couple of minutes. But before that, we have two more SEC bowl games to get to, and the next one is the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, one of the two bowl games that is presented by Cheez-It. And this was not a close game, ladies and gentlemen. You see the score there is 63-7, and this was pretty much a year ago that, if you don't remember, LSU is pretty much in the same situation that Purdue was. LSU had 39 scholarship players on the roster. Now, Purdue didn't have that drastic margin, but LSU was going through a new coach. Purdue, Jeff Braun, went to Louisville. His brother, actually, Brian Braun. And then they also brought in Drew Brees to be the quarterbacks coach and then assistant coach as well. So last year, LSU lost 45-20. Purdue with the opt outs of Aiden O'Connell. They had their top tight end opt out of this game, Payne Durham. They had Charlie Jones, their star wide receiver. This was just a long game for Purdue. LSU was able to score on pretty much every drive that they got in the first quarter, in the first half, except for their first drive. They went actually a 3-and-out. There was their only 3-and-out of the game. So every quarterback was pretty much able to score a touchdown in this one, except for Walker Howard that got into the game. Daniels had a touchdown. Nussmeier had a touchdown. Malik Neighbors had a touchdown as well. As you see there, trickery. They ran the Philly special to go up 42-0. Yes, they
And
ran a
Frank
trick
Wilson the
play.
fourth had a touchdown.
They ran a trick play to go up 42-0. So what a season it was for Brian Kelly, able to beat your arch rival in Alabama at the end of the season. I know it wasn't really was a rough end of the season there, losing to Texas A&M, losing to Georgia. But even without that 10-win season, your first really you haven't got to 10 wins since that 2019 season. The last two seasons you've gone around that 500 mark, 6 and 7 last year. In the 2020 season, I believe they went 5-5. So still a really good season for LSU. Purdue, I mean, this was just a game that they were overmatched.
Yeah, I think that's what it really came down to was Purdue made their Big Ten championship run behind Aiden O'Connell and Charlie Jones and the magic they put together. And beyond that, they didn't have the depth that LSU had. I mean, LSU lost Keishon Butte and Jack Besh and didn't skip a beat. I think that just shows you.
And the defensive opt-outs too.
True. Yeah, absolutely. So they were still getting a good pass rush on Purdue all day long. And yeah, I was really impressed with what I saw out of LSU in this one. Honestly, I don't know how it would play out in the regular season and if it could withstand the entire SEC stretch, but I really liked the two quarterback system we saw with Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier. I don't know if I want to roll that out next year with national championship expectations on the line, and I don't know if either quarterback would really buy into it for their personal development, but I think they really do mesh well together. Jaden brings a little bit more of a dual threat, but I like the idea of bringing Garrett Nussmeier in situations where you want to take a shot. So I don't know. Maybe there's something there. If they can keep them both on the roster, though, that would be great for LSU. But nonetheless, it was a very fun game. Got to see some big plays, some trick plays. And I think the future is bright.
I think at the very least, to the two quarterback system, both quarterbacks are pretty much different builds. As you mentioned, Jane Daniels is more of a runner. I know at times that he's been able to throw it up, but a lot of LSU fans rag him on, sometimes he looks around and then if really his first option isn't there, he just takes off. Garrett Nussmeier comes in, he's a different story. He goes in and the first play is like a 65-yard bomb down the field. But I think that Garrett Nussmeier, for him, the only thing that I really think he needs to clean up is the turnovers. I feel like every game that he's throwing a turnover, you go back to his time here, Purdue, he threw that late interception. The Southern game, he had, I believe, 2 interceptions on back-to-back drives in that blowout game. So I think that could work, but you definitely have to work it out. So I think that we have seen LSU quarterbacks go from, year one with the program to year two. I'm not saying that Jaden Daniels is going to be the next Joe Burrow and get that Burrow step where Burrow threw like 20 touchdowns in 2018 and went from 60. We'll never see that.
Look at
probably.
A guy like Danny Etling. He really settled
Danny
in.
Etling too. That could be a guy to look at as well. So I don't know if the two quarterback system could work, but honestly, in this game, I think it worked to perfection. I was wondering like what Brian Kelly was doing you look back at the press conference, he said that Garrett Nussmeier was going to get the third possession no matter what happened. So like I mentioned, Daniels got the first two, and then Nussmeier came in and really tore up that Purdue secondary that had some opt-outs as well and some key injuries. So that will close the book on LSU. Definitely a lot of expectations in Baton Rouge going in the next season. We'll talk more about them in a couple of moments whenever we end the show, going into more next year. And then the last bowl game of the season, number 22, Mississippi State versus Illinois. We do have an LSU fan in the comments. My mom saying go Tigers of that big bowl win over Purdue. And then we have Mississippi State and Illinois. And this was a defensive battle. Like I mentioned, after the first quarter, this game was a nothing score. But in the end, Mississippi State was able to score that touchdown. Actually, Illinois scored the touchdown first to get them up 10-3. Illinois, Tommy DeVito got a 2-yard rush, and then Mississippi State answered Will Rogers with a 10-yard pass to get it to 10-10. And then in the fourth quarter, the scoring didn't come till late. Mississippi State drove down the field. They got it about to a 27-yard field goal. They were able to nail it. And then here comes the trickery. I bet if you had Mississippi State 3.5, you were happy that this play happened. Illinois was trying to score a touchdown, so many laterals, but they lateraled it right to a Mississippi State defender, and he ran it in for a long touchdown to make it 19-10. So if you had Illinois,
only in college football.
Yeah, only in college football this happens. I swear.
NFL, you'd get benched.
It was a bad bet if you had Illinois covering the spread. It was a good bet if you had Mississippi State. So in the end, Mississippi State was able to win this one for the late Mike Leach. So definitely through all the adversity that you had, that they were going through. I know it was tough. It was a tough month for this Bulldog team. So you got to commend them for that.
Yeah, I think that it was a nice tribute to Mike Leach with the helmets and the first play and all that. The tribute that was not to Mike Leach was a game where the winner scored less than 20 points.
I bet he did not like what he was seeing.
But I do think that was more matchup dependent. We knew this game was going to be low scoring. And we knew that both of these defenses have really been playing well as of late. Illinois had the answer to the air raid, but Mississippi State looked equally impressive defensively. So no red flags here for Mississippi State, just pirate flags. Heading into next season, I think that they should be right in the middle of the pack in the SEC West and a team that can make noise just any given week, assuming that offense continues under Zach Arnett, the new coach. I don't think he'll try to really change the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, we'll see what this Mississippi State ball club will do. So that's going to be it for SEC Bowl Cap, and that's now going to go on to our bowl pick'em results. And as you see there, 9-5, 9-5, and 9-5. But I'm actually going to bring up, we did do the Bowl Mania, Capital One Bowl Mania. We do have some final standings. I know that there's a game to go. This is pretty much over, folks. Wade ended up taking the Sports Scramble group with a 29-13 record. So that's pretty good. That is pretty darn good. I finished in second, 27-15. Jacob finished at third, 26-16. And then Chet rounds out us with 25-17. So we tied here, but you take the cake for the Bowl Mania.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all did pretty well. We put some credibility on the show. Yeah, I in some of my games I did flip from when we did the initial Bowl Pick'em show. I actually did stick with my original gun in Georgia for that competition for the national championship because I just didn't feel like it was fair to change it after picking them a month ago. But yeah, I had a couple games go my way. I tried to pay attention to some opt-outs and then coaches leaving, regional ties, and was able to work my way there. But yeah, hats off to you guys as well. I think we all did pretty well.
Yeah, I think we all learned some credibility during this bowl season. It's definitely hard to go over 500 in Bowl Mania.
The SEC teams let me down, if anything.
Yeah, the SEC, I swear, y'all need to start playing better in this bowl season.
I probably went 9-5 in SEC games out of that, and then what, 20-7 with the other teams. I mean,
absolutely. Our own conference is letting us down. But we will now go on to the big game on Monday night, and that is our national championship preview. And it's presented none other than our friends over Fanatics. If you can use our Fanatics link to support your sports teams. And I got our daily code for you right here. It's Frigid, Frigid. You can save up to 65% off site wide. 24 hours only. They do have 3 hours on their time, but don't you worry. Fanatics always has the daily deals. That is definitely right. And it's also National Championship week. So TCU Georgia fans, get your gear, get your credit cards ready because whoever wins the national championship, whatever fan base is going to unload on the Fanatics deals. So if you want to use our link there, definitely use it there. So let's not waste any time. The national championship game you see there at the bottom of your screen. We do have the spread, number 3 TCU versus number 1 Georgia. Georgia is actually a 12.5-point favorite. And I'm telling you this, I don't know if you're a betting man or not. Plus 12.5 TCU, that just feels like easy money the way that TCU has been playing throughout the season. So TCU, Georgia, SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. I mean, SoFi's not even allowing tailgate. Like, what are you doing, Los Angeles? Like, come on. Like, never have the national championship here ever again if they don't allow that. It's a beautiful stadium, but come on, it's college football. You should be able to allow that. So, and without that, who do you got? Frogs or dogs?
You're gonna have to tailgate in that lake I'm seeing in the foreground.
Yeah, maybe you have to
A
steal a
loophole.
page out of Tennessee the way that they do it, tailgating.
That's right, or up on the roof.
That too.
But yeah, I don't I guess I get it because at times Georgia has looked really dominant and made really good teams like Tennessee look poor. So maybe the 12 points is warranted, but I just can't buy it. I mean, I just have to think TCU is going to hang in there. I think TCU is more gifted offensively than Ohio State is, and we saw the Buckeyes give Georgia all they could handle. And really, like we talked about it, I think Georgia kind of got lucky to win that game. They didn't look like the better team. It's hard to get lucky twice in the college football playoff. So I think if this game's close, the scale swings TCU's way. I just don't know if Georgia can muster it out 2 times in a row. And remember, they're not playing in Atlanta this time.
Yeah, I respect the pick, and like you mentioned, they're not playing in Atlanta more. They're playing at SoFi Stadium, so I think it's going to be a near 50-50 split. I know that Georgia fans, they always take over stadiums, but TCU, this has been a program that hasn't been here since the 1930s. They've have been relevant in the Mountain West and in the Big 12. So really good first year for Sonny Dice. We haven't seen really any first year head coaches get this far. They were able to seal the deal last weekend against Michigan. And TCU has been a team that we have talked about a lot on the show. We've had a lot of their games in the Big 12. Some of us have always picked against them, and some of us have always have favored the Horned Frogs. So if you have Max Duggan behind you as well, I think that their defense, they're going to have to play as the level of physicality as they did. I know that they gave up 45 points, but if you were watching that game, TCU really controlled the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. And you make a good point. Georgia did get lucky in the first time, and it's not as always you get a second chance. But we saw Ohio State get a second chance that they got blown out, and they played pretty good. So I think that Georgia, even with the win, they weren't satisfied. So I think that they used their emotion here. I think that this is going to be a close game. I think it's going to be another high-scoring game. Both defenses have been reeling. I think that both offenses, especially you had 2 veterans on your both sides. You have 2 good running backs with Keandre Miller, and then you have Kenny McIntosh, and then receivers. TCU has got a guy that no one has really talked about. I think Quentin Johnson needs more credit than he needs to as well. And then Georgia, I think that they're going to have to get the tight ends more involved. Ohio State had an effective game plan. Brock Bowers. We saw Dwayne Washington, the 6'7" tight end. He got nicked up. We didn't see him as much in this one. So we're an SEC show. I always like to go with the SEC in these moments. TCU is definitely going to be a sexy pick in the betting world and also in the pick'em world as well. But in the end, I got the Dogs going back to back and finishing off the deal here of a successful season. And Chet is also going to go with the Dogs as well. So you're the lone frog. So we'll see
All
if
right,
you're going to be
Dogs and
doing this
Frogs.
to us a week from now, or the Dogs are going to be barking.
I'm going to give you a
next week.
jingle here.
What's that?
Bet on the Frogs, but take the Dogs.
All right.
But
I
also
like
the
that.
Frogs are the Dogs.
I guess
so
people
I
can use that when they're looking at this 12.5-point spread. So that is our national championship picks. Let us know down in the comments of who you got win the national championship, TCU or Georgia. Curious of your thoughts. Obviously, I think we have a lot of Georgia fans, especially on our Facebook page. I'm sure that if they came all in here, they would put all the Georgia faith in their team. So that is our national championship preview. We do have some more hot topics to get to, and that is presented by our final sponsor of the show, Piper Golf Balls. Chet always is saying, like, I got some golf balls for you, and he keeps moving away from us, but we'll definitely get them eventually. But if you want to pipe your drives with Piper Golf Balls, you can use our link there. Sports Scramble 10 is the code to use to save 10% off of your order. So some recent news that we had just yesterday on the show, Bobby Petrino, former SEC head coach of the Arkansas Razorbacks. I think Arkansas fans just want to forget this man, but it's going to be hard to forget him when he's going to be on the sidelines or in the press box or wherever he is when he's calling the plays. He's going to be joining Texas A&M as their offense coordinator. So it's looking like Jimbo Fisher is stepping back and giving Bobby Petrino. We'll see how that works. We'll definitely have to see. Next one is Trey Sanders becomes the third Alabama player to transfer from TCU. These Alabama players like, well, we didn't make the playoffs, so might as well go to the team that's in the national championship this year. So we have also seen, you brought up Jack Bech. That's another former SEC player to go from SEC team to TCU. And I'm going to try to pull up where the other two Alabama players here. As I do that, are the next hot topic. Tennessee promotes quarterback coach Joey Housley to offense coordinator. So most of the play calling was on Josh Heupel. Looks like that's going to be split as well among the quarterback coach. So nice promotion as well. And the other two Alabama players was offensive tackle Tommy Brockenmeyer and wide receiver JoJo Earl. So those are the other two Alabama stars. And then the next one is Mississippi State. He's leaving Stark Vegas and heading out west to Washington. That's another good program. 11 wins for Michael Penix. Michael Penix is coming back in that one. Defense has been formidable as well. So those are your hot topics for the week. Which one out of the four is the most noteworthy?
I think it's TCU outside the conference, continuing to build with 5-star talent. I mean, taking players from Alabama and LSU.
Yeah.
We saw them kind of use that to their advantage this year. They got some key transfers that have been a part of their title run. TCU is going to be in the Big 12 still next year, and I know that most likely Oklahoma and Texas will both be in the Big 12 still, and you're going to have the new teams come over. So it's going to be a weird year in that conference, but TCU's got to weather the storm and establish themselves as the big dog in that conference. And, it's going to take teams like Cincinnati and Houston, BYU, a little bit of time to start to get big-time transfers and Power 5 talent in the recruiting world. So if TCU can continue to bring in big-time talent in the transfer portal and recruiting, I think that they can get on a nice little run here. We've already seen them make it to a national championship game as it is. So I definitely like that for them. I don't know what I think about the Bobby Petrino hire. That's a big gamble for Jimbo Fisher. But maybe he says, you know what? At the very least, it improves my offense. And if it's an epic failure, I'll just take my buyout and move back to Florida. So I don't know what to say about that one.
Yeah, TCU is becoming a powerhouse in the Big 12, and we're going to get the new Big 12 actually next year. Like you mentioned, the teams, UCF, Cincinnati, BYU, Houston will be those four teams, and then Oklahoma and Texas at the very earliest. 2024 will be the year that they hop on over to the SEC, but realistically, it's going to be 2025, so they'll get 2 more years of that. But TCU, I mean, they're going to be a program that's not going to go away, especially if you can poke players away from a team like Alabama. And then with Sonny Dykes, if you get to the national championship in your first year, the ceiling is just really going to be there as well. And if you can win it in your first year, man, that's going to be the story of the year for this college football season in 2022. So that is going to be the end of the hot topics for this season. And now we go on to our answering questions segment. We don't have any from the comments, but we do. We will both answer and ask a question each as well. So you want to go first? Do you want me to hit it with my
Hit
question?
me with the question so I can hit you with 1 second.
All right. So this is the end of the year. if you know me, I always like to just go early season preview for the SEC. So give me your early SEC championship and a team that could be a dark horse going into 2023.
All right. So for now, I am going to have to stick with Georgia on the East. I just think overall they'll have a lot of talent. I think their one open hole will be at quarterback, but they can have their pick of the litter at the transfer portal. Honestly, if I was Sam Hartman, I would have waited to see if that job opened
Yeah,
up. But
Georgia would have been a good landing spot because Stetson Bennett after this year, what's the quarterback situation going to be? You're going to have to start going into the recruiting trail.
and they do have a lot of talent
Yeah,
there.
they do. I'm not questioning that.
But yeah, I mean, I think that would have been a slam dunk. But not a lot of luck from the last Wake Forest quarterback to go to Georgia, Jamie
Nope.
Newman. So maybe not. But I'm gonna stick with the dogs in the East, and then in the West, man,
The West is tough.
I gotta give it to LSU. I do think Alabama's gonna be back, but I just think LSU is a more complete team at the moment.
All right.
And surprise team, I think it's a Joe Milton led Tennessee team actually being better than the Tennessee team that we saw this year.
Wow, that is a bold take going into the next season.
Just
So
because
yeah,
I think the system's there, and I think
yeah.
that he actually has a more talented arm than Hendon Hooker. I don't think he's a better player now, but I don't see any reason for a drop off there. I mean, uh, that offense in its own right, I think, is plenty good enough no matter who's running it.
Yeah, and the defense is young, so they're gonna have. I know that they had an opt out of their star linebacker, but they're still getting some talent. They were young, a defense. They were challenged at times, but I think they ended the season on a right note. So I definitely like all those picks.
All right, and my question for you: we're going to take the SEC to the NFL.
Oh boy,
A little bit more of an immediate future question: which SEC quarterback coming out of the draft will have not the most impact in year one, but the most impact in the next 3 seasons? So you got, Bryce Young leading the pack, Will Levis, and Anthony Richardson also coming out. They're kind of more of projects, but do you think those guys could surpass Bryce given a little bit of development?
I think it's definitely possible. I think the likely landing spot for Bryce Young is the Houston Texans. And if you are either Houston Texans fans or you're just a fan of the NFL, there's not really much wide receiver talent. There is young talent. Really, the wide receiver one was Brandon Cooks this season. You had Nico Collins. You just had some guys that you have never even heard of step up for the Houston Texans. And then your running back situation, you do have Damian Pierce, a former Florida running back. He showed some burst before he got injured, and now they have to go on. So I think with Bryce Young and then the defense, I mean, that's just another story as well. So I think the situation isn't great for Bryce Young going to Houston. So if you can see a guy like Stetson Bennett, who's probably going to be like a fourth round pick, what if he ends? I'm going to say even in Hendon Hooker. If Hooker or
That's a
Bennett
good
ends
point.
up in New Orleans, the way that offense is set up right now, I think that they're going to have a bright future. I mean, Hendon Hooker at like number two, if he goes even to like a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because Brady won't play. Like I don't know how many years that man has left in him, but it's not looking like much. So I think it's definitely more of a wait and see, but I'd be more on the side of saying that I'll go with the other quarterbacks have more like success
Bryce
out of the
Young versus the
gates than
field.
Bryce Young. Yeah, I'll go with the field.
You're going with the prospects rather than the guy who's going to
Yes.
be a guaranteed starter next year. And
I think Houston is just in a very bad situation right now. I think Lovey Smith is definitely not the coach for you as well. So I think that yeah, that's just been a really a franchise that's been in the dumps for a couple of years.
yeah, I don't like the fit. I like the fit, but I don't like the
The talent is there,
situation.
but it's just man, the receivers around him I just can't get over.
Yeah, most of the time we see a young quarterback come into a situation where they've got a young coach with an upstart offense, worked wonders with Joe Burrow, and now we're seeing it with Trevor Lawrence. I don't know if you can say that's there for Houston. So Bryce Young, he's got the talent to do it, but I agree with you. I think if one of these guys could end up in Tampa Bay, that
Yeah.
would be
That's why I said New
huge.
Orleans because I mean the quarterback situation's probably you're probably gonna see Jameis Winston leave. And then you're probably, I don't know if they're going to re-sign Andy Dalton or not. He's a free agent since he's a 1 year deal. So pretty much right now, like logistically, you have no quarterbacks on your roster. But I think that the receivers that the Saints have, we have, obviously Michael Thomas, we haven't seen him in a couple of weeks. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a Saints fan. It's just realistically, the Saints are going to draft a quarterback. It's definitely going to happen. They don't have a first round pick. Granted, if Sean Payton gets traded and when a team gets a first round pick, but we'll see if that happens or not. But second round pick is probably going to be an early to mid round pick since the Saints didn't make the playoffs. So I just think that Hendon Hooker would definitely be the fit there, and even a guy like Max Duggan sets a
Yeah,
minute
there it is.
as
That
well.
was gonna be my
That
solution.
that would have been. I mean, it's just like Max Duggan just reminds me of Drew Brees. Like I'm
Yeah,
not saying he's going to be a Drew Brees. He just has the build of Drew Brees and the mindset
I
of him
I
too.
would like that pick very much.
Yeah. All right, that's a really good question as well. That's going to be a one that is definitely going to have to, when we get to our NFL draft and we're doing our mock draft, that question is definitely going to be interesting as well. So we'll keep that in mind going into the spring. But that'll be it for the 2022 season for SEC Talk. We just want to thank everyone for tuning in to this show and all of our shows as well. So we just want to thank every one of our viewers, even if you put it on, throughout the show as well, throughout the season. Wade, I want to thank you for joining me once again. It's definitely been a blessing that you've been on here ever since I brought you on. This show has definitely improved year in and year out. So I just definitely want to thank you for all of your analysis every week and your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for giving me a platform, and I think we're excited to see how the three of our uh, college football focused shows can grow. This being the original for me, so always excited to talk SEC football here, and then we got Sports Scramble for y'all in the off season, talking more about basketball and golf and baseball coming up, and then you and Jacob, y'all are hardcore. You're gonna do year-round college football coverage. I think that with the way the transfer portal is working and
Very
NIL,
active.
there'll be enough talent. I mean, enough topics. So we'll look forward to seeing what you guys have to say as well.
Yep, it is a bittersweet ending to the show, but it has been a successful season here in 2022, and there is still one more game to go. But that'll be it for our football content here on SEC Talk. So our next show, if you want to put on our calendars, will be on early March, our yearly March Madness show. Now every year, I look forward to this show, and then my brackets survive for one day. So hopefully this year I can do better. We're gonna definitely have to watch a lot of film. I haven't been much into college basketball as I've been, but once the national championship is over, once the NFL season is over, I'm going to be locked in on college basketball so I can finally end this streak of going. So that's going to be our next show. So we'll definitely look forward to our annual March Madness show. It's always a fun event in the sports world. Like Wade mentioned, you can catch us on the Sports Scramble on Sunday night. So if you're missing our voices, you can just head on over there. College football coast to coast is rolling on Monday afternoons. SEC Talk usually rolls on Tuesday nights, but this week we're a little bit busy this week, so we put it on Thursday night. So that's going to be it for our SEC football season. We look forward to seeing y'all in March and are definitely now counting down the days when we're going to be talking SEC football heading into 2023. Hope everyone enjoys the rest of their week, and we'll see you here in March for college basketball. So long.